Good morning, everyone. It is sure good to see everyone here, especially glad to see some faces we don't get to see very often. I want to echo what everyone else has said. Happy Mother's Day. I also want to mention, so that no one runs off just too quick, we are going to have, in appreciation for our mothers, some flowers that are going to, we're going to have people at each door as you leave, so please don't leave without grabbing a flower from someone we'll have one by each door and then the back door as well. So just want to show our appreciation for the mothers, and Liz picked out those flowers, or at least ordered them and picked out the ones, and they are really pretty. So we are thankful to have the opportunity to appreciate and recognize our mothers. Also want to mention, as I mentioned before, the summer series, we call it flyer, is on the bulletin board, and there are now also some printed off that you can take and share with people or post or whatever the case might be. And then we'll also, we're willing to have that soon on Facebook to be able to be shared that way. As we think about mothers, because it is Mother's Day, and I do want to address that topic today, I was thinking about some different ideas related to mothers, motherhood, and so forth, and looking at some different passages of Scripture, and something caught my eye. It is a passage that we probably just gloss over. It's at the end of one of Paul's letters where he's just mentioning a bunch of names, going through a bunch of different, tell them hi, tell them that they've been doing good work, that kind of stuff. And we don't usually pay much attention to those sections, right? But there is a statement made by Paul that I think is very interesting, both in terms of the implications of it as related to motherhood, but also just as something that kind of shows a personal side of Paul that is really interesting. In Romans chapter 16 and verse 13, he mentions a mother's name, or at least a mother. He doesn't give her name, he gives the name of her son. But he mentions her kind of, it seems like almost in passing, but also in relationship to him. And I think that's what's really interesting that we're going to look at this morning. If you will look at Romans 16 and verse 13, just this short little verse, again, amid this long list of names, Paul says, "Greet Rufus, chosen in the Lord, also his mother, who has been a mother to me as well." That statement is so interesting to me. I came across that and I just started thinking about that. We think about this concept of recognizing mothers, being thankful for mothers, and typically when we think about that concept, we think about biological mothers, right? We think about the one who gave me birth. We think about the one who gave them birth, grandmothers and so forth. We think about our blood relatives that we refer to as mothers in that sense. But Paul is not even sticking solely with this idea of blood relation here as he talks about Rufus's mother. He says, this woman has been a mother to me as well. So what? He's saying that Rufus is actually his brother, and this is... No, obviously not. This is a different kind of relationship. But it's something that I think is very interesting for us to look at for just a few moments this morning. Because I want us to think about first the implications in terms of Paul's real mom, right? What about Paul's real mom? He's saying this woman has been a mother to him. What does that say about his real mother? Well, first we've got to ask, what do we even know about Paul's real mother, right? Are we even told anything about her at all? Well, once we start doing a little digging, really the answer is no, we're not told much about her. We are told a little bit about Paul's family background. He says, I'm a Jew. I was born in Tarsus in Cilicia. That was just the north kind of corner of the northwest corner, or east corner rather, of the Mediterranean Sea. He was born in Tarsus. He was brought up in the city. He was educated at the feet of Gamaliel. If you're familiar with other parts of Acts and other parts of the Gospels as well, Gamaliel was one of the prominent teachers among the Jewish Pharisees at this time. This was someone that it would take a degree of wealth, a degree of standing to have your child educated by him, and Paul was educated by him, which says something about his family. He says he was educated at the feet of Gamaliel according to the strict manner of the law of our fathers, being zealous for God as all of you are this day. So clearly his family background, he comes from Pharisees, or at least we can have no doubt that his father would have been a Pharisee. I'm almost positive that that would have been the case. But nothing much is mentioned about his mother here, although it seems likely that she would have supported this effort to train Paul up in this way. We're also told a little bit in a different part of Acts, as Paul is describing himself. He says, I am a Pharisee, a son of a Pharisee. There's a little bit of a variant in the text there. Some translations actually say, the son of Pharisees, plural, meaning both his father and his mother were devout Pharisees. It is with respect, then, he says, to the hope and resurrection of the dead that I am on trial. And so he is setting his background. Paul is setting his background for us in different self-descriptions in Acts. But once again, we don't really know much specifically about his mother. We also have a statement in Acts 22 where we're told as this tribune comes to him, he's been imprisoned, as he often is, for preaching the gospel, and he asks him, are you a Roman citizen? And he says, yes. And the tribune answers, I bought this citizenship for a large sum. You had to pay a whole lot to become a Roman citizen if you weren't born naturally as a Roman citizen. But Paul responds, but I am a citizen by birth. That was a higher status even. You know, we think about, even in our own country, right or wrong, I'm not defending it right or wrong, but there is a sense in some minds at least that if you're a natural born citizen versus someone who immigrated and became a citizen, well, there's a little bit of a status difference. Again, I'm not defending it one way or other. I'm just saying that was the same kind of mindset that you would have in Roman society as well. A natural born Roman citizen has even a higher status than a citizen who is not natural born. So all of these things give us a little information about Paul's background, but we don't really know anything about Paul's mother. Paul, by the time he writes Romans, where he mentions Rufus's mother, Paul is in his 50s at least, at best we can tell, which means in that day and time when life expectancy wasn't very long, it's certainly possible that his mother was no longer alive. Even if she was still alive, or in his earlier days in Acts as he's teaching, if she's still alive, does she support his Christianity? Does she convert, or does she remain a staunch Pharisee and oppose Christianity, including the Christianity that her son now proclaims? We don't know. We know very little about his biological mother. But there's one thing we do know, based on his statement in Romans. And that is, whatever we may not know about his biological mother, he clearly didn't mind having more than one. Perhaps in his mind, if his mother had passed away, this is now a mother that he gets to have because his has passed away. Or perhaps if his mother is still alive but doesn't support him in his faith, perhaps this is a mother in the faith that he has, even though his own biological mother doesn't support him. We really don't know. We do know that Paul saw this relationship as something special, even beyond blood and the bond of physical family. Which kind of leads us to ask another question, doesn't it? What makes someone a mother? Now, perhaps you say, well, if you have a child, if you give birth to a child, right? Well, certainly if we want to be technical, what about mothers of adopted children or foster mothers? Well, okay, maybe we include them too. Well, then what about Paul's statement, right? Because Paul was neither adopted by Rufus's mother, as far as we can tell, nor fostered, nor anything like that, certainly not biologically her son. And yet he still regards her as a mother. There's some interesting passages I think we can consult on this. Notice in Genesis chapter 3 and verse 20. This man called his wife's name Eve because she was the mother of all living. Now, once again, we have this idea of literal, she is going to give birth to ultimately all living, right? But there's also kind of a extension. She's not just the mother of her immediate children, but there is this relationship. But again, it's still kind of held to be a little bit literal in this text. But then we come to one of her descendants. Jesus is on his way to the cross. He is about to be raised up on the tree and killed for the forgiveness, ultimately, of the sins of the world. But he doesn't forget his mother in this process. John tells us in John 19, as he is going to the cross, and make no mistake, even though he has not yet been suspended, he is in mind-numbing pain at this point. Flesh literally hanging in strips off of his body. And yet, he looks to his mother and the disciple whom he loved, which we believe to be John, standing next to her. He sees the two of them, and rather than weeping for what he is losing, rather than being distressed over his fate, he looks at the mother, he looks at the friend. He says, "Woman, this is now your son. Son, this is now your mother." Establishing between them a relationship not based on blood, not based on any formalities of adoption or anything like that, which, by the way, that was a thing in the ancient world, but that's not what he's saying. He's saying, I'm going to be gone. In their society, it probably would be difficult for Mary, because it seems at this point that Joseph had died, for her oldest son, that would be Jesus, to die. That might put her in a difficult position. He essentially says, I want the two of you to have the relationship of mother and son. Mother to care for, to love this man that I have loved as a brother, as a friend. I want you to have the love of a mother toward him. Son, I want you to have the care, the provision, the love for this woman as the love of a son for a mother. Even in his last hours, Jesus establishes this relationship and recognizes that it is legitimate. It doesn't take blood. It doesn't take technicalities. It takes a choice, whether there is blood or not. Notice, before these events, of course, we'll go back to that in a second, but notice how Paul himself describes his actions towards those that he would teach among the churches that he planted. In particular, he's talking here to the church in Thessalonica. He says, we were gentle among you, like a nursing mother, taking care of her own children. What is he saying here? He's saying the way we treated you, the way we interacted with you, we chose to do so like a mother would with her children. Using this model of the choice that, hopefully naturally, a literal mother and child, a mother would take towards her children. So we see what Paul and what Jesus is giving us as a model. Being a mother is not simply about the technicalities, the biology. It is a choice. For those who are literally biologically mothers, it is a choice to be a mother in how you interact with your child, how you care for and love your child. And for those who may or may not have their own children, but also want to care for and selflessly love others, like Rufus's mother did with Paul. Even there, it is a choice to love, to care for. That did not diminish Rufus's love for his mother or Rufus's mother's love for Rufus. But she also was a mother to Paul, and Paul a son to her. Being a mother is not simply about DNA or documents. It's about selflessly loving another person as if they were your own. That's why we honor mothers on a day like today. Because so many of us can point to biological and perhaps even beyond biological mothers in the faith. Or just simply people who have cared for us in this way. That is the legacy of motherhood. one who will love selflessly, whether or not you are actually their own. I think about my own mother, one who has, to the absolute best of her ability, loved me selflessly. And now that Liz is part of the family, loved her selflessly as well. I also think about others. In no way diminishing the love of my actual mother, but others who also have cared for and loved me like a mother with a son, even though they also have their own children. That is a beautiful part not only of the family system that God has created, but especially, as we're going to look at also, the church, the family of God that has been established for our benefit. Because when we think about mothers like this, whether we're talking about biological mothers or whether we're talking about a mother like Rufus's mother was to Paul, what do these mothers really mean to us? And what I mean by that, you might see something like this, and if you are perhaps a mother or grandmother, and now your children or perhaps even your grandchildren are off in the world doing their own thing, and perhaps you have some opportunities or some relationships with others who are younger, who kind of are in the position perhaps of a son or a daughter to you, but you say, well, there's not that much I can do in this kind of relationship. I care about them, I love them, but I'll never be that important to this person. Not anything like their real mother. I want us to think about the model that we are given. Notice in 1 Timothy chapter 5, as Paul is giving some instructions of how the church should function to Timothy, this young minister. He says, "Do not rebuke an older man, but encourage him as you would a father. Younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, young women as sisters, with all purity." You see what he's done there? He's structured the church to be a family with fathers and mothers and brothers and sisters. Meaning that even, let's say, if a mother passes on, if a son or a daughter leaves this life, we have so many more in the family of God. Not in any way to diminish the bond that should and hopefully does exist between biological relations. But Paul is giving us something so beautiful here. Whether there is any such tie or not, physically speaking, the church is designed to enhance that bond and to provide us with many mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters and sons and daughters. He would say in Titus very similarly, older women are likewise to teach what is good, to train young women to love their husbands, to love their children. I think about stories Liz has told me of older women that she greatly respects and admires and loves spending time with. That is a beautiful bond. That is a beautiful opportunity. That is something that we should not take for granted. This should lead us back ultimately once again to the words of our Lord. Remember what Jesus says? He is teaching, there's a crowd surrounding him, and probably because they're a little embarrassed and think, what in the world is he doing? His mother and his brothers come and they try and speak to him and maybe convince him to tone it down a little bit. And someone tells him, your mother and your brothers are seeking you. And meaning no disrespect to his biological family, but to make a spiritual point. You remember what Jesus says? He says, who are my mother and my brothers? He says, whoever does the will of my Father in heaven. That's my brother, my sister, my mother. Can you imagine those of you who have adult children. Can you imagine living in the day of Jesus, and if you were a follower of Jesus, being old enough technically to be his mother, and him saying, if you do my will, you are my mother? And yet that is the kind of relationship that was designed by Christ to exist among his people. The bond that we can have, united as we are by service to God, that then can be displayed in our love for one another. Even without any physical relation, mothers in the faith have great power to change lives for good. And thus, going back to the idea of biological mothers, how much more do mothers who are both mothers in the real sense of, or not the real sense, but the biological sense of having given birth to this child, as well as mothers in the faith, being both with your children, what great opportunities you have. What great commendation you deserve because of this position you have been put in. It's a beautiful thing that God has designed. It's a beautiful thing that can be used in so many contexts outside of simply the limitations the world might put on it. Just as Paul's life was enriched by Rufus' mother, so our lives are enriched by mothers in the faith, whether they have any relation to us or not. Certainly, we want to honor those who are our mothers from a biological standpoint, especially those who also are our mothers in the faith. And we also want to recognize the opportunity for those of you who are in that position to be mothers to others as well. And for those of us who have been recipients, we ought to not take that for granted. What a beautiful, wonderful opportunity. Something we ought to honor. Something we ought to give thanks for. Once again, I do want to remind you, as we leave this morning, we do have those tokens of appreciation, those flowers for you. Please make sure you get that. I hope that this morning we will remember, we will say a special prayer of gratitude for how God has designed both the family and especially the church to allow us to have these kinds of relationships that nurture and help us as we strive to serve God together. If there's anything we can do for you this morning, we always stand ready to help, to encourage, to pray for one another. If we can do something for you, please let us know as we stand and sing together.
Jesus is tenderly calling thee home,
Calling today.